Picture this. You're building a house and suddenly you start tearing down the walls you just put up. Sound crazy? That is exactly what Trump is doing to the global economy. January 20th, 2025. He returns to the Oval Office and it begins. Withdrawal from international organizations, investment bans, the deportation of millions of people. One decision after another, without a pause. In Shenzhen, factories go quiet. In Detroit, showroom lights go out. In Brussels, emergency meetings run around the clock. It looks like the world is losing its balance. But if you look closer, this isn't chaos, it's a plan. Trade, energy, technology, labor, everything is changing at once. It's as if someone decided to rewrite the rules of the global economy without asking the other players for permission. But who pays for this? Americans? The Chinese? Europeans? And why break a system that seemed to be working? Today, we are breaking down the most massive economic restructuring of the 21st century. How a series of decisions changed literally everything in a single year. And who actually wins while the world's largest economy goes to war with itself. To understand how we ended up at this point, let's go back 7 years. 2018. Trump bursts into a meeting and says, "Enough! America has played by other people's rules for too long." He promises to bring manufacturing home and punish those who are living at our expense. The Chinese steal technology, the Europeans slap tariffs on our goods, and what do? We just watch? He finds a simple solution: put tariffs on everything. Back then, no one realized that the word tariff would soon become as common as sanctions or crisis. The first blow hits steel, a commodity no economy can function without. By this time, the US was buying nearly half its steel abroad, from Canada, Mexico, South Korea, and Europe. The American steel industry was in decline, factories were closing, workers were leaving, and cheap import steel was flooding the market. Trump declares this a threat to national security. You can't build ships, planes, or machinery without your own steel. He wanted the country's defense industry to be independent of imports. The wording sounds bold, but the goal is obvious: protect American factories and show voters that manufacturing is coming home. The only problem? The new tariffs don't hit adversaries, they hit allies: Canada, Europe, and Mexico. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau learns about the tariffs not from a personal call, but from the morning news. Just yesterday, he was having dinner with Trump discussing security cooperation. Today, a knife in the back. Trudeau faces the press, and for the first time, journalists see him without his trademark smile. He speaks briefly. It is an insult. Europe doesn't stay on the sidelines. They impose their own tariffs on American goods. But they don't do it at random. They study the US electoral map. Brussels picks targets with surgical precision. For example, Kentucky bourbon, home of the Senate Republican leader; Harley-Davidson motorcycles from Wisconsin, a key swing state; or Levi's jeans from California. Every tariff hits the district of an influential Republican, turning a trade war into a political headache for Trump himself. But that was just a warm-up, because the real war begins with China. One July night that same year, American tariffs go into effect. Chinese imports worth $34 billion are hit. Beijing stays silent for an hour, 2 hours. Markets get nervous. Will China just roll over? Then the next morning, Beijing time, China's Ministry of Commerce publishes a list of retaliatory measures. $34 billion in Chinese tariffs on American goods. The exact same amount, dollar for dollar. The targets? Soybeans, which America sells to China by the billions. American pork and cars. Beijing aims exactly where it hurts the most: the farmers of the Midwest who voted for Trump. Within months, the war escalates. First $34 billion, then 60, then 100. By autumn, tariffs cover $200 billion worth of goods. The headlines are loud, but the main action is happening quietly. Procurement departments are rewriting contracts. Suppliers are demanding prepayments. Accountants are recalculating the cost of every item. And warehouses are being stuffed to the brim because tomorrow everything will be even more expensive. Marketers argue over how much they can hike prices without scaring off buyers. Companies try to bypass this by assembling in third countries. One part of the supply chain snaps, another disguises itself under new routes, and a third just can't pivot in time. To understand how this works in real life, just look at one thing many of us see every day. For clarity, let's take a standard American crossover. Middle class, nothing fancy. It's assembled in the USA. But here is what's inside. The engine arrives from Mexico. Electronics and chips come from Taiwan and South Korea. The battery for the hybrid version is also Korean. The steel for the body is partially imported. Even small things like sensors and wiring cross borders multiple times before the car hits the showroom floor. Now apply the tariffs. 10% on the Mexican engine, 15% on the Korean batteries, another 10% on Taiwanese chips, 25% on imported steel. Do the math. Each tariff adds anywhere from a few hundred to a couple of $1,000s to the cost of the car. The automaker faces a choice: pass the price hike to the buyer or eat the loss. Usually they choose a compromise, raise the price but not by the full amount, and their margins evaporate. Multiply this by millions of cars a year. Analysts estimate that the 2025 tariffs added about $3,000 to the average cost of a new car in the US, and the buyer pays for it. Now scale this up to the entire economy. Thousands of products, millions of components, trillions of dollars in trade. At every node, a tariff changes the equation. Economists at the New York Fed calculated that the average American family pays an extra $1,500 a year due to tariffs. That's not a one-time fee, that's every year. Clothes are a bit more expensive, appliances a bit more expensive, electronics, furniture, toys. Everything is just slightly pricier, individually unnoticed, but collectively painful. But tariffs trigger more than just price hikes. They trigger a restructuring of the entire system. Companies start looking for workarounds, countries swap roles, and entire regions suddenly emerge as winners. From this moment on, the world starts changing faster than anyone can keep track of. When the tariffs kicked in, companies faced a choice. Sure, you could keep shipping goods from China and pay 30% on top, or raise prices and lose customers. Or you could find other routes. Companies chose the third option. Let's look at Vietnam, a small country in Southeast Asia that pulled off an economic miracle in 7 years. In 2017, Vietnam exported $47 billion worth of goods to the US. In 2024, that number hit $136 billion, nearly triple. Companies fled China for Vietnam en masse. Giants like Nike and Adidas moved their shoe factories. Electronics, textiles, furniture, they all moved. Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City turned into massive industrial hubs. Ports operate 24/7. New industrial zones are being built, roads, worker housing. But a question arises. Is this new production or just transit? Harvard researchers calculated that only about 40% of that export growth is linked to real factories and jobs. The rest is simply repackaging Chinese components. The scheme is simple. Parts arrive from Shenzhen, they get tweaked in Vietnam, slapped with a new label, and shipped to the US as Vietnamese. Technically legal, but in essence, it's just dodging tariffs. Vietnam finds itself caught between two power centers. On one hand, it gets investments and orders from American companies. On the other, it remains a massive importer of Chinese electronics and materials. Over $120 billion a year. A huge chunk of that heads right back to America, just through a different door. By 2024, US Customs starts launching investigations. Several shipments of electronics are detained, supply origins are audited, and new certification requirements are imposed. For companies, this is a signal. The label "Made in Vietnam" is no longer a guarantee of safety. The world is forced to find new routes, further from China, but not always cleaner. While some seek digital solutions, others are redrawing the physical map of trade. Entire countries are changing their roles in the global economy. Mexico is one of them. In 2023, it overtook China to become America's top trading partner. Exports to the US reached nearly $400 billion. A 25% increase in 7 years. Cars, auto parts, electronics, appliances, northern Mexico is literally one continuous manufacturing cluster, working for the US market. Geography has suddenly become more important than efficiency. Previously, companies sought the cheapest place to manufacture and supplied the world from there. One factory in China, and the goods go everywhere. Now that doesn't work. Apple is a good example. Before, almost all iPhones were assembled in China and shipped globally. After 2018, the company began building a parallel system. Part of production is moving to India for the American and European markets. China remains, but now it primarily serves the Asian market. This is called China Plus One. Two parallel systems instead of one global one. Why? Because risk has become more expensive than efficiency. What if tariffs hit 50% tomorrow? What if logistics freeze up? What if politics bans trade entirely? Companies can no longer afford to depend on one country, even if it costs more. The IMF calculated the consequences. If the global economy remains fragmented, the world will lose about 0.5% of GDP. That's roughly $500 billion a year. Unpleasant, but survivable. But if the world splits into two blocks permanently, the US and its allies on one side, China and developing nations on the other, losses could reach 7% of global GDP. $7 trillion annually. That's like the economies of Germany and France combined disappearing every year. Why is it so expensive? Because globalization isn't just cheap labor, it's the division of labor. One region makes chips, another assembles phones, a third mines rare metals. When this system falls apart, everyone is forced to duplicate production at home. It's more expensive and less effective. And here's the key point. Tariffs started this restructuring, but tariffs are just the beginning. Because simultaneously, Trump is striking on other fronts: energy, technology, the labor market, finance. And when you add all these strikes together, you realize initially, this was pitched as protecting American manufacturers from Chinese competition. But in reality, it's about rewriting the rules of the global economy. January 20th, 2025. On his first day back in the White House, Trump signs an executive order to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, the international treaty where countries commit to reducing CO2 emissions to curb global warming. This is the second time. He pulled America out in his first term, Biden brought it back in 2021, and now Trump is pulling out again. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is pouring money into clean energy. Europe is building wind farms and solar stations worth trillions of euros. China is churning out EV factories faster than anyone can count. Even the oil monarchies of the Persian Gulf are investing in renewables. America, however, is turning in the opposite direction. Drill, baby, drill. It's an old Republican slogan that Trump is bringing back to life. The White House is betting on good old-fashioned energy. Drilling licenses are issued in days. The Keystone XL pipeline is stretching toward Canada again. Alaska is buzzing. America is pumping oil at such a pace, it's as if the wells will run dry tomorrow. The logic is simple. Energy is the foundation of industry. The cheaper the energy, the cheaper the production. European factories pay 3 times more for electricity than American ones. Why? Because Europe invests in expensive renewables and shuts down nuclear plants. America keeps it simple. It pumps cheap gas and burns it without worrying about emissions. And they are doing it radically. The Trump administration begins dismantling the Inflation Reduction Act, Biden's law meant to accelerate the transition to clean energy. It allocated hundreds of billions for EVs, charging stations, and solar panels. Now, these measures are under review. EV subsidies are in question, charging infrastructure programs are frozen, tax credits for solar and wind are being reconsidered. Companies that planned projects based on these guarantees are suddenly left in limbo. Construction started, money was invested, but the promised subsidies might never arrive. Projects freeze, investors panic. In the short term, it works. The US became the top oil producer back in 2019. Over 13 million barrels a day. By the beginning of 2026, production grows even more. US LNG exports helped Europe survive the energy crisis after Russian gas was cut off. American gas replaced Russian gas, cementing the US as an energy superpower. But there is a flip side. While America bets on oil and gas, China and Europe are capturing the markets of the future. China controls 70% of the production of solar panels and EV batteries. Europe is building factories and setting standards for green tech. When the world finally switches to renewable energy in 10 years, and it will because the tech is getting cheaper, America risks being left behind. Plus the reputational costs. At the COP30 Climate Summit in November 2025, China and Europe stood together, positioning themselves as leaders of green development. They created a fund to help developing nations, taking the seat America left empty. America went from climate leader to outcast. Europe isn't stopping there. Starting in 2026, they plan to introduce a carbon import tax, CBM. Carbon border adjustment mechanism. The gist is, if you make steel or cement with high carbon emissions and want to sell it to Europe, you pay a tax. This is a direct hit on American industry, which runs on cheap fossil fuels. American steelmakers face a choice: pay the European carbon tax and lose competitiveness, or modernize production to lower emissions, which is expensive and slow. Even inside America, Trump's decisions remain controversial. Tech and finance giants like Google, Microsoft, and BlackRock lobby to return to emission reduction strategies. They point to physical risks. Hurricanes, droughts, and floods hurt business too. Many states are going their own way. California and New York are strengthening their own green standards. Companies are voluntarily buying renewable energy and demanding carbon reporting from suppliers. Effectively, business and individual states are doing what the federal government refused to do. But federal policy sets the tone, and right now the tone is cheap energy over climate commitments, competitiveness over reputation, and short-term gain over long-term risk. Will it work? We'll know in 10 years. But for now, energy is just one front, because at the same time, Trump is hitting the labor market. And here, the stakes are even higher. When the factories come home, who will man the machines? Trump's answer is simple: Americans. But behind that answer lies one of the toughest labor market reforms in decades. In the spring of 2025, he launched a mass deportation program. According to the Department of Homeland Security, up to 11 million people are targeted, nearly 7% of the country's workforce. Most work in agriculture, construction, logistics, and services. These are the people harvesting crops, building houses, cleaning streets, delivering orders. These industries feel the blow first. In California and Texas, nearly half of agricultural workers are migrants. Same in construction. When they leave, production stops. In the San Joaquin Valley, farmers left fields unharvested. In Houston and Dallas, construction sites went idle. Amazon warehouse shifts were cut. The American Farm Bureau estimates direct losses from labor shortages in the ag sector exceed $10 billion per season. Construction is losing about $8 billion. Jobs are opening up, but there is no one to fill them. Wages rise and prices follow. In sectors like food and housing, inflation topped 8% that spring, with extra costs for American households estimated at about $1,300 per year per family. The White House calls this restoring fairness. We are bringing jobs back to Americans, the president says. Statistics partially confirm this. Unemployment among unskilled workers drops from 6% to 4%, but pressure on the economy grows. Anything requiring physical labor becomes more expensive: food, housing, services. Economists call this a demographic shock. For decades, the economy got used to cheap labor, and now that resource is suddenly scarce. American companies adapt. Some cut volume, some speed up automation, some move operations abroad. By fall 2025, orders for industrial robots in the US jumped nearly 30%, and investment in logistics automation rose by 40%. The reform intended to support workers is changing the very structure of the labor market. Wages rise, but stability vanishes. Companies slash staff automate lines and implement tech where 3 people with tablets manage work that used to require 30 laborers. At the moment, jobs go unfilled, business looks for solutions, not people. Robots, automation, algorithms, anything to close the gap between rising costs and production needs. And against this backdrop, the administration launches a new national project, the AI Plan. This document came out in July 2025. The White House declares a goal: make the USA the global center of the AI industry. Translated from political speak, this means one thing: if there aren't enough hands, The country will manufacture the future using machines. About $500 billion is allocated for infrastructure, model training, and computing power. Money flows into building data centers, developing cloud platforms, and supporting big tech. To speed things up, environmental restrictions on construction are lifted and energy consumption standards are simplified to cut licensing times. AI becomes not just a tech project, but an industrial one. After all, every new data center devours more electricity than a small town. This explains why Trump bet on cheap gas and coal. You can't support this infrastructure without cheap energy. Domestically, the project turns into a race for resources. Microsoft and Google compete for NVIDIA chips. OpenAI opens branches nationwide. Stock markets react with trillions in growth. In the second half of 2025 alone, the tech sector gained nearly 40%. The AI plan removes barriers that held the industry back. Companies get freedom, but power concentrates in fewer hands. Independent developers find it harder to compete. Equipment is expensive, compute access is limited, and big players dominate model training. The administration calls this a new industrial revolution. They compare it to electrification or the railroads. But the real cost of this progress quickly becomes visible. Data centers are sprouting up like factories during industrialization. One large center consumes as much power as thousands of homes. In Nevada and Iowa, entire server cities are being built, windowless fields of buildings where millions of processors hum. Their energy consumption jumped 40% in a year, and local electric bills followed suit. In some counties, rates rose by a third. By summer, water shortages began because cooling these machines costs more than running a steel mill. Strange tension points appear on the US map. Iowa, Ohio, Arizona. Power grids, new gas pipelines, and big tech money converge there. People protest new power lines. Farmers complain about drought. Energy companies build plants around the clock. While some call it the future, others pay for it out of their own pockets. When the US announced the $500 billion AI plan, a new race began, this time for computing power. Europe tries to keep up but gets stuck in regulation debates while America builds. China can't stay on the sidelines and launches its own program, about $137 billion for AI and data centers. But they hit a wall. The US tightens sanctions on chip and cloud exports. By fall 2025, US chip exports to China dropped by nearly 60%. Seeing this, Asian nations rush to buy equipment while they still can. The world divides again, not by ideology, but by computing power. While some countries create technology, others just rent it. He who holds the servers holds the power. And when algorithms take control of information, the next step is controlling what cannot yet be coded, the human being. In late 2025, the White House announced the US withdrawal from the World Health Organization, WHO. The statement is blunt. The WHO is inefficient and wastes taxpayer money with no visible result. Domestically, it's framed as a sovereignty issue. The administration says America can coordinate research, produce medicine, and track outbreaks on its own. The budget frees up about $400 million in annual contributions. Dozens of federal agencies get new powers. The CDC, military labs, private biotech companies. They're all tasked with creating a purely American global monitoring system. On paper, it's modernization. In reality, it's a severed connection. International vaccination programs running for decades lose access to US lab data. Joint clinical trials freeze. Pharma companies face barriers registering drugs abroad. Standards are no longer synchronized. Consequences surface months later. Old infections flare up in Africa and South Asia. Vaccine shipments are delayed. WHO coordination stalls. Europe and China create a new structure, the Global Health Alliance, to handle drug distribution and surveillance. It quickly gains members, becoming a symbol of the new multipolar era. One part of the world is treated by American standards, the other by European and Asian ones. US pharma grows. Big companies get direct government contracts. State drug purchases rise 20%. But outside the US, trust in the American health system falls. In World Bank and OECD rankings, the country loses ground in scientific cooperation for the first time in 20 years. At first glance, this is about medicine. But in the context of previous steps, the logic is the same. Lock key industries inside the country and make the nation independent of the outside world. Energy, labor, technology, and now health, all under one flag. The only question left is, who wins when globalization falls apart? By the beginning of 2026, it is clear. America is not returning to the old world. It is building a new one, its own. Factories are running, oil is flowing, markets are up, unemployment holds at 4%. The economy seems to be coming alive, but it's not the America of before. It is a country turned inward, creating its own ecosystem. Cheap fuel runs the factories feed the market provides technology, and technology is power. While everything grows internally, the opposite happens outside. Global trade flows shrink by trillions. Corporations slash foreign offices and repatriate capital. For many nations, America is once again the center of gravity, but not as a partner, rather as an employer. They export raw materials, data, and labor, and buy back the finished product. This imbalance looks less like globalization and more like a new kind of colonialism. Only now, instead of territory, they control infrastructure, energy, chips, software, finance. And any glitch in Washington reverberates globally, from factories in Vietnam to food markets in Africa. The world isn't exactly collapsing, it's just stopping being shared. Europe rebuilds its economy around climate, Asia bets on tech, But neither strategy is universal anymore. Everyone builds their own world, at their own pace, by their own rules. Maybe this is the new era, an era of multiple economies spinning separately. The only question is, who will outlast the other? The one who locked themselves in, or the one who stayed connected? What do you think, guys? Can such a system work long-term without global ties? Or is this just a pause before a new crisis? Share your opinion in the comments. We really want to know how you see this. And if this episode resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss new videos on how the global economy really works. See you soon.